So I'll invite you to close your prayer books for a few moments. We're going to do something a little different for our community this Shabbat, this Friday evening. And you'll see what that is in a moment. But before that, just a question. Think back to, perhaps you have experienced this before, perhaps you have not, but if you have, think back to the first time you heard the 10 Commandments read aloud from Torah. So some of you may be able to recognize that. So for example, some of you may have been a part of our Adult B'nai Mitzvah process, in which case many of you may not just have heard the 10 Commandments chanted for the first time at your Adult B'nai Mitzvah, but you likely chanted them for the first time at your Adult B'nai Mitzvah. Some of you may have grown up in communities where your family went to Shabbat services regularly on a Saturday morning, and so you're familiar with hearing Torah read publicly, and probably you heard the 10 Commandments read there. Or perhaps in your family or in your adult life, you found yourself at a Shavuot service where you heard the 10 Commandments chanted. But by and large, in Reform communities these days, there are not huge swaths of people attending Shabbat services on Saturday mornings to hear Torah read regularly. Shavuot tends to be the least familiar to people of the Shalosh Regalim, the 3 festivals where Torah is read. And because the 10 Commandments are not chanted on the high holy days, there are in fact many people who have never heard them chanted or read in some sacred synagogue context. Although if I were to ask you how many of you are familiar with the 10 Commandments, I imagine everybody's hand would go up, because the 10 Commandments, as you know, don't just have a place in Jewish life. They are foundational to Western civilization, ethical foundational codes, legal constructs, etc. But we are a group of people in Jewish community, and we find ourselves at the Shabbat, where Parshat Yitro is located, and Parshat Yitro gives us the opportunity to hear the 10 Commandments. So that's what we're going to do in a few minutes. You are allowed to read Torah on a Friday night. We don't do it a lot, but from time to time we do, and Cantor Goldstein and I thought that this might be a neat opportunity to do that. But for one main reason. And that has to do not with the ancient world, but with our modern one. So you may have noticed that unity is hard to find these days. Not just broadly amongst Americans, but even within the Jewish community. Even within this room. It's hard to feel 100% aligned, unified, as one in community of any form these days. And if there is one pervasive message, not just of the story of the 10 Commandments, what our tradition actually doesn't call the 10 Commandments, it calls Aseret HaDibrot, the 10 utterances. That tradition comes to teach that of all of the moments in Torah that the Jews experienced collectively together, there was one, where all of them were united with, quote, one heart, one people. And that was the receiving of the 10 Commandments. But the trick is, the rabbis say it wasn't just our ancestors who experienced that. Some of you who study Talmud on Mondays studied this the other day with me, is that it wasn't just the people that the Torah says were there. Everyone was there. Somehow, all of us were there too. All of the Jewish people, who ever were and ever would be, found themselves based at the bottom of Mount Sinai as one, to receive these commandments. Now, can you imagine anything like that happening today? We don't even all go to the same shuls, right, as like Jewish people. What would it mean to think of experiencing something so unifying that we would all be there? We would all be willing to hear it, and we would all be willing to accept it, which is the key to what happened after the commandments were given, the 10 commandments. Our people declared as one voice, and it shouldn't say our people, I should say we declared in one voice, na'aseh v'nishma, we'll do it, and we'll listen to it. We'll understand it. I'm not sure if that's possible these days, but I'd like to think that we can condition ourselves, and that we should condition ourselves to thinking that it might be possible and working toward it in the ways that we can. And the 10 Commandments give us that opportunity. One of the main teachings about the way that the commandments were given or presented to the Jewish people by God is that God said them aloud, but every person who was there heard them in the language they spoke in a way they could understand them. And that was the key to bridging all of the divides. Because there are not single words that all of us understand and agree upon together. But if we can all hear them in our own way, sort of like a United Nations session, if you think about it that way, a speaker, right? But everyone has their own translation access to them. Maybe they stole it from us and our tradition. But that is the way that our rabbis understand and invite us to engage in listening to, taking in, and applying these Aseret HaDibrot, these 10 commandments, these 10 notions in our lives. And so, Cantor, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about the trope, and then we'll, as they bolster that idea, and then we'll chant some Torah.
So the beautiful thing about the 10 Commandments is that when we engage in the study of the 10 Commandments, which is supposed to be actually pretty regular, we divide them in their original divisions. And the cantillation that we use ends with a sof pasuk, an end of a verse. And often in English we might call that a period, but in fact in Torah it's hard to distinguish between the middle of the verse where there's an ending and the end of the verse where there's an ending. Sometimes they feel pretty similar. But when the 10 Commandments are chanted publicly, there is a special way that they're supposed to be chanted. And the division, rather than by verse, the division is by commandment. So there are some commandments that are very, very quick, like do not steal. That's pretty fast. It's 2 words. In the study of that, that's a whole verse. Or actually, no, it's connected, but the divisions are different. And in the reading, in the public reading, it's a whole verse. Likewise, in the commandment about not making graven images, not bowing down, that commandment, it consists of numerous verses, but when it's publicly chanted, it's 1 verse, which means somehow you have to extend the verse and the punctuation. So all of a sudden you hear sounds that you don't hear very often in Torah. All sorts of movement and sort of drama, perhaps. And so you'll hear tonight something that sounds a little different than Ve'ahavta, which is Torah cantillation. Pretty simple Torah cantillation. And this is because it is the public reading, the reading that divides the portion into the commandments so that we can more clearly hear each one. And it gives us a sense of elevation. Even the cantillation are called the Tamei Mikra Elyon, the above or the over cantillation. And they're not all above the word, but they're elevated as opposed to tachat. Underneath, we move quickly through it to study it. So listen now for, when you hear it, for sounds that you're not used to hearing. And you'll know them. You will know them.
So here's what's going to happen. we're going to have a brief Torah service. The tradition is when you hear the Ten Commandments being chanted, as our people stood to receive them, we stand as well, but we're going to bring the Torah out for a hakafah. So if you're able, we'll invite you to stand in just a moment when we open the ark. We're going to invite all of us as one community in one voice, and we pray in one heart to join together in the brachot before and after Torah. You can find those on page 250, 250. I think that's what it says. Yep, of your Siddur. And just one more brief thing so you know what to expect. As we can't translate actively in every possible language because there's only two of us, but Cantor Goldstein is going to chant. And as he chants, I'm going to translate in the English just behind his words so that even if you don't know Hebrew, you'll be able to understand what's being said. I'll invite you to try to let those words wash over you in a way that you're open to hearing them, perhaps differently than you've thought about them before. Would you please rise?
ישמחו השמיים, השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ותגל הארץ. ישמחו השמיים, השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ותגל הארץ. ירם הים, הים, ירם הים, ירם הים ומלואו. ירם הים, ירם הים, ירם הים ומלואו. ירם הים, ירם הים, ירם הים ומלואו. ירם הים, ירם הים, ירם הים ומלואו. ישמחו השמיים, השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, השמיים, ישמחו השמיים, ותגל הארץ. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו. רוממו כי קדוש אדוני אלוהינו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו. רוממו אדוני אלוהינו והשתחוו להר קודשו.
Let's join together. Baruch hu et Adonai hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai hamvorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Vaydaber Elohim.
God spoke
את כל הדברים
all these words,
האלה לאמור.
saying,
אנוכי אדוני אלוהיך,
I am Adonai your God,
אשר הוצאתיך
who brought you out
מארץ
from the
מצרים,
land of Egypt,
מבית עבדים.
the house of bondage.
לא
not
יהיה לך
have for yourself
אלוהים אחרים
other gods
על פניי.
that you put in my face.
לא תעשה לך
Do not make for
פסל
yourself idols
וכל תמונה
and any image
אשר בשמיים ממעל
that's in the heavens above
ואשר בארץ מתחת בארץ
or in the
מתחת
earth below
ואשר במים
or in the water
מתחת
under
לארץ.
the land.
לא תשתחווה
bow down to
להם ולא תעובדם.
Don't worship them.
כי אנוכי
Because I,
אדוני אלוהיך
Adonai your God, am a jealous God,
פוקד עוון אבות
bringing
על
forth the sins of the
בנים,
fathers, the
על
adults to the
שלישים
children, to the
ועל
third,
רביעים
to the fourth
לשונאי,
generation of those who hate me,
ועושה חסד לאלפים,
but bringing kindness to the thousandth
לאוהבי
of those who
ושומרי
love
מצוותיי.
and keep my commandments.
לא תישא את שם אדוני אלוהיך לשווא,
Don't take God's name in vain,
כי לא ינקה אדוני
because God will not acquit
את אשר יישא את שמו לשווא.
those who take God's name in vain.
זכור
Remember
את יום השבת
the day of Shabbat
לקדשו,
to sanctify it.
ששת ימים
6 days
תעבוד
you can work
ועשית כל
and
מלאכתך,
do all of your work.
ויום השביעי
But on the seventh day,
שבת
it is a Sabbath
לאדוני
God,
אלוהיך.
your God.
לא תעשה כל מלאכה.
Don't do any work.
אתה
You,
ובנך
your son,
וביתך,
your daughter,
עבדך ואמתך,
your male or female slave,
ובהמתך,
your cattle,
וגרך
the
אשר
stranger
בשעריך,
that is in your midst.
כי ששת ימים
Because 6 days
עשה אדוני
God made
את השמיים
heaven
ואת הארץ,
and earth,
את הים
and the sea,
ואת כל אשר בם,
everything that is in it,
וינח ביום
and
השביעי.
rested on the seventh day.
על כן
And thus
ברך אדוני
God blessed
את יום השבת
the day of Shabbat
ויקדשהו.
and sanctified it.
כבד את אביך ואת אמך,
Honor your parents
למען יאריכון ימיך
so that your days will be long
על האדמה
on the land
אשר אדוני אלוהיך
that Adonai your God
נותן לה.
is giving to you.
לא תרצח,
Don't murder.
לא תנאף,
Don't cheat.
לא תגנוב,
Don't steal.
לא תענה ברעך עד שקר,
Don't bear false witness against your
לא
neighbor.
תחמוד בית רעך,
Don't covet your neighbor's house.
לא תחמוד אשת
Don't covet your neighbor's
רעך,
spouse.
ועבדו ועמתו
Your servant.
ושוגרו וחמורו.
Or ox or donkey. That's what it says.
וכל אשר
Or
לרעך.
anything that is your neighbor's. Let's join together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chayei olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten
Oh,
haTorah.
Mishabera.